The moment the screens went black, I knew they would never forgive me. Not because I had done something wrong, but because I had reminded them of something they desperately wanted to forget. The blackout wasn't dramatic at first. No sparks, no explosions, no cinematic crash, just silence. A sudden, suffocating absence of motion, like the building itself had stopped breathing. 1 second. The trading floor upstairs was alive. Hundreds of screens pulsing with numbers, graphs sliding in real time, dashboards updating so fast you could feel the money moving. The next second, everything went dark. Every monitor, every terminal, every system that mattered. The hum of the servers, the low, constant vibration that had been the soundtrack of my life for decades, collapsed into nothing. It felt wrong, like a heartbeat stopping mid-beat. I stood perfectly still in the server room, my hand still resting on the cold steel railing. The air conditioning units were silent now. The LED indicators across the racks had gone black, one after another, until the room looked like a graveyard of machines. Then came the sounds. A distant scream. Someone shouting, "It?" Phones ringing endlessly with no one able to answer. Behind me, I felt movement. Heavy footsteps. Fast. Uncontrolled. The new CEO burst into the doorway, chest heaving, eyes wide in disbelief. His tailored suit jacket hung crooked, like he'd put it on in a hurry or forgotten how to wear it properly. "What did you do?" he said. Not yelled, whispered. I turned slowly to face him. No rush, no anger, just a strange calm. The kind that settles in after you've already accepted the worst outcome and realized it can't touch you anymore. "I left," I said. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Everything just went down. Every system, every "do you even understand?" "I understand exactly," I said. He looked past me into the darkened room, like the answer might be hiding between the silent machines. For the first time since I'd met him, his confidence cracked. Not shattered, but cracked enough to let fear leak through. This was the moment. The one people would whisper about later. The one that would get buried in carefully worded press releases and vague explanations about unexpected outages. The day a company that prided itself on efficiency learned what dependency really meant. But this wasn't the story yet. This was the ending. To understand how a quiet man in a basement could bring an entire corporation to its knees, you have to understand what came before the silence. You have to understand why no one thought to ask who held the keys. So let me take you back. Back before the glass offices, before the buzzwords, before I became invisible. I was there before the building had a name, before the logo was finalized, before the mission statement was something more than a paragraph scribbled on a whiteboard that never quite erased cleanly. In the beginning, we didn't have departments. We didn't have titles that meant anything. We had folding tables, second-hand computers, and a single rack of servers that I assembled myself from parts bought at discounts I still remember. I didn't choose to be the technical backbone. I just was. While the others talked about what the company could be, I obsessed over what it needed to survive. Redundancy, security, stability. I built systems that assumed failure would happen because it always does, and made sure it wouldn't matter when it did. During our first real product launch, I slept on the floor next to the servers. Not metaphorically, literally. I brought a sleeping bag and a pillow because we couldn't afford downtime, and I didn't trust anything I couldn't hear breathing. When the fans changed pitch, I woke up. When a drive stuttered, I knew which one before the alert fired. That kind of intimacy doesn't come from training. It comes from care. Success came faster than any of us expected. Too fast, honestly. Investors started calling. Real ones. The kind who don't ask if you want to grow, only how fast. They wanted structure, predictability, a face. And that's when I learned something important about myself. I wasn't the face. I didn't argue when they suggested a younger CEO, someone articulate, someone who looked like growth. I understood. The company needed someone who could sell the dream. I preferred making sure the dream didn't collapse under its own weight. so I stepped down. Officially, I transitioned into a strategic advisory role. Unofficially, I stayed exactly where I was, deep inside the systems, making sure nothing broke while everyone else climbed. The arrangement was unusual. I retained ownership, voting shares, control over core infrastructure, not because I demanded it, but because no one else wanted the responsibility. They trusted me, or maybe they just didn't understand what they were handing me. I wasn't an employee. I was a constant. Years passed. The company grew upward, new floors, new departments, new layers of management. I moved downward, into the basement, closer to the machines that still felt more honest than people. My office became a converted storage room. Concrete walls, exposed pipes overhead, a single fluorescent light that buzzed when it warmed up. No windows. No decorations beyond a corkboard with handwritten network diagrams and dates only I remembered. People forgot I was there. That was fine. When systems work perfectly, no one notices the person who built them. The CEO who replaced me understood that. He left me alone. Occasionally, he'd stop by the basement, hands in his pockets, and ask, "Everything stable?" "Rock solid," I'd say, and it always was. Until the day he sold his shares, the announcement came with excitement and applause. A company-wide email filled with phrases like "new era," "bold leadership," "visionary future." The new CEO arrived like a storm wrapped in a smile. He was young, 30-something, perfect posture, perfect teeth, the kind of confidence that comes from never having personally paid the price for a bad decision. He spoke fast, moved fast, thought fast at least. He thought he did. The first thing he did was remodel the executive floor. Glass walls replaced solid ones. Standing desks replaced chairs. Everything looked modern and uncomfortable, like a place designed to be photographed rather than used. The second thing he did was bring in consultants. They were all young, bright, armed with tablets and buzzwords. They walked around the building nodding at charts they hadn't built, pointing at systems they didn't understand. Legacy overhead, operational inefficiency, redundant human roles. I heard those phrases echo down the stairwell into the basement. At first, I didn't worry. Every new leader wants to feel like they're making an impact. It's a phase. Then the questions started. Not about uptime, not about security, not about disaster recovery, about cost. How many people actually touch this system? Why is this architecture so complex? Can't this be automated? One afternoon, a junior engineer came down to see me. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, shifting his weight from foot to foot. They asked who controls root access. He said, "I didn't look up from my screen." "And?" "I told them you do." I nodded. "That's correct." He hesitated. They didn't like that. I almost smiled. The new CEO came down himself a few days later. The elevator doors opened, and he visibly recoiled at the smell of cold air and metal. He looked around like he'd stepped into a forgotten part of the building. "This is where it all runs?" he asked. "Yes." He looked at me then. Really looked. The gray in my hair, the old chair, the terminal windows instead of flashy dashboards. "You've been here a long time," he said. "Since the beginning." He laughed. Not cruelly, not yet. Wow, that's impressive. But his eyes had already moved on. I felt it then, the subtle shift. The moment I stopped being a person and became a line item. To him, I wasn't history. I was overhead. And overhead, in his world, always gets cut. The first thing they took wasn't my job. It was my relevance. It happened quietly, the way erosion always does, grain by grain, meeting by meeting, decision by decision that no longer included me. Calendar invites stopped arriving. Questions that used to come directly to me started going to people who forwarded them back with confusion written between the lines. "Hey, they're asking about the encryption protocol. Can you explain this to them? Do you know why this failsafe exists? They want to remove this redundancy." Is that safe? Every time, I answered carefully, precisely, without ego. Every time, my answers were summarized, diluted, and presented upstairs as someone else's insight. I watched it happen from the basement. The new CEO held town halls, where he spoke about efficiency and innovation. He loved phrases like cutting dead weight and future-proofing the company. Every sentence landed with applause. People nodded, smiled, took notes. I stood in the back when I bothered to attend at all. He never acknowledged me, not once. Then the consultants came downstairs more often. They stood behind me while I worked, arms crossed, whispering to each other like I wasn't there. Why is this so manual? Why isn't this abstracted? This feels old. One of them, barely old enough to rent a car, pointed at my screen and said, "We can probably eliminate this role entirely." Role, not person. I swallowed the bitter taste rising in my mouth and kept typing. The humiliation wasn't loud. It was procedural. They reassigned permissions, limited access, temporarily, asked me to document systems I designed in my own handwriting decades earlier, as if I were a guest in my own house being asked where the breaker box was. One afternoon, I received an email from HR. Subject line: Operational Restructuring Review. Mandatory attendance. Mandatory. That word sat heavy in my chest. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday at 10 a.m. Executive floor, glass conference room. I arrived early. The room was too bright. Sunlight poured through the windows, reflecting off the polished table, forcing me to squint. The chairs were sleek and uncomfortable, designed to look expensive rather than feel supportive. The CEO arrived exactly on time. He didn't shake my hand. HR followed him in, clutching a folder like it was a shield. He sat down, folded his hands, and smiled. That smile, the one practiced in mirrors, never reached his eyes. "Thank you for coming," he said. "We won't take much of your time." I nodded. My mouth was dry. He leaned back in his chair. "As you know, we've been reviewing operational efficiency across all departments." "Here it comes," I thought. "We've identified several redundancies," he continued. "Legacy roles that no longer align with our strategic vision." Legacy. That word again. HR slid the folder across the table toward me. The sound of paper against glass felt deafening. Inside were documents I recognized immediately. Termination language, severance terms, a carefully worded explanation that said everything and nothing at once. I didn't open it right away. "So," I said calmly, "you're terminating my contract." He nodded, relieved that I'd said it for him. "Yes, effective immediately." Immediately. I felt a pressure behind my eyes, not tears, not yet just the weight of decades compressing into a single moment. "We're moving to automated systems," he said, warming to the speech now. "Cloud-native solutions, AI monitoring. We don't need someone babysitting servers anymore." Babysitting. I glanced at HR. She stared at the table. "You never asked why the systems are built the way they are," I said. He waved a dismissive hand. "We've reviewed the documentation." Documentation. The word tasted sour. "You never asked who designed the fail-safes," I continued. "Or what happens if—" He cut me off, his smile tightening. "We appreciate your historical contribution, truly. But this company can't afford sentimentality." Then he said it, casually, carelessly, like it was an obvious truth. "We can't keep old, useless dinosaurs around just because they've been here forever." Old, useless, dinosaur. The words landed one by one, each heavier than the last. I felt my face grow warm, my hands clenched beneath the table, not with anger but with something worse: erasure. I had built the spine of this company. I had protected it while others chased headlines. And now, in this glass room filled with sunlight and ignorance, I was being dismissed like obsolete software. Security was already waiting outside when the meeting ended. That was when I knew they weren't just firing me, they were afraid of me. As I packed my office, the basement felt colder than usual. The fluorescent light flickered once, twice. My hands moved automatically, tools into drawers, Notebooks into a box, cables coiled with the muscle memory of a lifetime. People avoided my eyes. One engineer whispered, "I'm sorry," like a confession. Another pretended to take a phone call. I carried the box upstairs myself. No one helped. The CEO stood near the elevator, chatting with someone from finance. He laughed, loudly, comfortably, like a man who believed the problem had been solved. As I passed him, he glanced at the box and smirked. "Good luck," he said. "Enjoy retirement." The elevator doors closed between us. As I descended for the last time, the weight finally hit me. Not rage, not despair, a hollow ache, like something vital had been scooped out and left behind. I returned to the basement alone. The server room welcomed me with its familiar hum, steady and loyal. The machines didn't know I'd been fired. They didn't care about titles or age. They just did what they were told. I set the box down, sat in my chair. And for the first time in decades, I didn't know what I was supposed to do next. Upstairs, they were celebrating efficiency. Downstairs, the man they thought they'd defeated sat in silence, forgotten, dismissed, convinced they'd won completely. They had no idea this was the lowest point, and they had no idea what they'd just handed me. The silence in the server room didn't feel empty. It felt attentive. I sat there for a long time after the elevator doors closed upstairs, my cardboard box resting at my feet like a coffin for the version of myself they thought they'd buried. The hum of the machines wrapped around me, steady and familiar, like breathing. The lights blinked in their patient, orderly rhythm. No judgment, no dismissal, no arrogance. Just systems doing exactly what they were designed to do. I stared at my hands. They were shaking not from anger, but from the delayed shock of humiliation finally catching up to my body. My mouth tasted faintly metallic, the kind of taste you get when adrenaline has nowhere to go. For the first time that day, I let myself feel it. The meetings I'd been excluded from, the documentation requests framed like orders, the word dinosaur, tossed so casually it felt rehearsed. They hadn't just fired me. They had rewritten the story in their own heads, that I was obsolete, decorative, harmless, a relic they could quietly remove without consequence. That belief, that single, fatal assumption, was where they went wrong. I leaned back in my chair and looked around the room. Every rack, every cable run, every access point. I remembered installing them. Not just the hardware, but the logic behind it. The contingencies stacked inside contingencies. The decision I made years ago, when the company was still fragile, when one bad actor or one reckless executive could destroy everything we'd built. I remembered the meeting. We were younger then, nervous, still afraid of losing what little we had. "Who controls the master access?" someone asked. There was a pause. I'd cleared my throat. "I do." They didn't argue. They trusted me. Not because I demanded power, but because I understood responsibility. The encryption architecture wasn't decorative. It wasn't legacy bloat. It was intentional, layered, designed to assume that someday, someone at the top would think they knew better than the system itself. That someone would try to simplify what they didn't understand. My phone buzzed on the desk, then buzzed again, then again. I didn't pick it up. I stood instead and walked slowly toward the primary console. Each step felt heavier, not because of doubt, but because of finality. This wasn't anger-driven. This wasn't revenge in the childish sense. This was correction. I rested my fingers on the keyboard. The command I was about to run wasn't destructive. That's what made it elegant. It didn't erase data. It didn't corrupt systems. It simply removed access. A lock doesn't scream when it closes. It just locks. I hesitated for one last moment, not because I wasn't sure, but because I understood the weight of what would happen next. Above me were thousands of people whose work depended on these systems. Customers, clients, engineers who had no idea what was coming. And one CEO, a man who believed power came from titles and announcements and applause. I pressed enter. The response was instant. Authentication failed. Access revoked. Volume sealed. The lights on the racks blinked once, twice, then went dark in sequence. like a city skyline shutting down, building by building. The hum died, and with it, the illusion. Within seconds, my phone exploded with sound. Calls, messages, notifications stacking so fast the screen lagged. I picked it up just long enough to read the previews. What happened? All systems are down. Are you doing this? Call me now. I powered it off. Footsteps thundered above me. The sound carried through the stairwell, chaotic, panicked, completely unplanned. People yelling over each other. The absence of structure was almost impressive. Then the door burst open. The CEO stood there, breathing hard, his confidence stripped down to raw fear. His eyes darted past me to the dark racks. "What did you do?" he demanded. His voice cracked on the last word. I turned slowly in my chair to face him. "I left," I said, his jaw clenched. "You can't just everything is down. Trading, support, internal systems. Do you have any idea what this costs per minute?" "Yes," I said calmly. "I designed the metrics." He stepped closer, pointing at me now. "You're fired. You don't work here. You don't get to touch." "I was never employed," I said. That stopped him. "What?" he snapped. "I was never an employee," I repeated. "Check the contracts. I'm an owner, and I retain sole control over the encryption architecture. You didn't fire staff." I stood. "You fired the lockkeeper." His face drained of color in real time. That's not possible," he said weakly. "Legal reviewed everything." "They reviewed payroll," I said. "Not authority." He pulled out his phone with shaking hands, dialing someone, anyone who could tell him this wasn't happening. Behind him, more executives crowded the doorway. CFO, legal, operations. Their faces reflected something I'd never seen upstairs before. Unfiltered panic. The calls came quickly after that. Lawyers first, then investors. Then the board. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I simply explained. Ownership, control, safeguards. Each sentence landed like a weight. By the time the emergency board call ended, the CEO was sitting in my chair, head in his hands. No one looked at him. No one defended him. Because arrogance is expensive, and he had just made it visible. "I can fix this," I said quietly. Every head snapped toward me, but not for him. Silence. That was the moment power fully shifted. Not with shouting, not with threats, with clarity. By the time I restored access hours later, the decision had already been made. The CEO was finished. And for the first time since that glass conference room, I didn't feel small. I felt precise. The building felt different after the systems came back online. Not louder, not brighter, quieter. The kind of quiet that settles after something irreversible has happened. Conversations dropped when I passed. People moved with a cautious awareness, like survivors walking through a place that had almost collapsed. No one congratulated me. No one needed to. The board asked me to stay. Not casually, not politely. They asked like people who finally understood what had been holding the roof up this entire time. They offered a formal title, a redesigned office, an apology wrapped in legal language and urgency, promises of respect, promises of visibility. I declined all of it. "I'll stabilize the transition," I said. "Then I'm done." And I meant it. The CEO didn't return to the building. By the end of the week, his name had vanished from the website. By the end of the month, his LinkedIn headline had changed, reframed, softened, rewritten to make the fall look like a choice. But everyone inside the company knew the truth. He hadn't been defeated by rebellion. He had been undone by assumption. I spent my last days doing what I'd always done, quietly fixing things. Not just the systems, but the documentation they'd ignored. I explained why redundancies existed, why automation without understanding was just arrogance wearing a lab coat, why stability was never accidental. People listened now, not because I demanded it, because silence had taught them the cost of ignoring me. On my final day, I returned to the basement one last time. The server room hummed again, alive and obedient. The lights blinked in their steady rhythm. Everything exactly where it should be. I rested my hand on the rack and felt the vibration travel up my arm. For years, this room had been my whole world. Now, it felt complete. I shut down my terminal, packed the last of my things, and walked toward the exit without anyone escorting me. Outside, the air felt different, lighter, like I could finally breathe without listening for alarms that never came anymore. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free, because the truth is, I never wanted revenge. I wanted recognition, or failing that, respect. And when that wasn't possible, I accepted something better: balance. I learned that power doesn't announce itself in meetings or wear tailored suits. Real power is quiet, patient, and deeply underestimated. It sits in basements, in documentation no one reads, in people no one thanks. And when it's ignored long enough, it reminds the world why it exists. Final thought: never mistake silence for weakness, and never fire the person who built the system while they're still holding the keys.